Today I'm going to share and analyze 4 ways to get from C to E minor. Our first progression is C to B7 flat 9 sharp 9 to E minor. So really this is like a tricked out B chord. So before we understand the function of that really lush chord, I'm going to break it down in simpler terms. In the key of C, we have all these notes. Our goal is to go from here to here, C to E minor, and the most typical way to do that is to go from the chord's 5th. So in the key of E minor or E major, really doesn't matter, we build a chord off of this B. So that's a very typical way to get from C to E. And it's a really interesting chord because we have some outside notes here. We have 2 in particular. The black keys are not present in the key of C. We have D sharp and F sharp. And so it adds a lot of nice outside color when we go. But I wanted to obscure the simplicity and harmonic expectedness of this progression. So I basically just tricked it out with a lot of jazz tension. So first, first thing I do is, instead of this B here, I add an A, which is the 7th. Okay, so that makes it a B7 chord. And then I add a flat 9, which is a C. So B7 flat 9, and then I add the sharp 9, which is this D. So this is B7 flat 9 sharp 9. And then the last thing I do is I take away this F because I don't want to double notes. So that's how we get this chord here, B7, flat 9, sharp 9. Really pretty. So that's how we can take something that's simple and add a little bit more unique colors to it. Our next progression is C to E flat major 7, add 2, to E flat major 13, no 11, to E minor. It sounds like this. So this is an interesting chord. We have a lower approach chord here from C to E flat to E and it rises into that E minor. The other interesting thing about this chord is this D sharp is so heavily associated to be part of that B7 chord or B chord. However, instead of using this as the 3rd, the most important tone of that B to E thing, we're actually recontextualizing it as a flat chord, coming from the flat world of harmony. And that's present because we have E flat, G, and F, which is our E flat major triad. So that type of sound. So a really beautiful recontextualization of that note. Instead of sharp, it is flat. If we take a look at this chord structure here, it has a really interesting chord shape because really it's based off of the first 3 notes of the major scale, but in 2 different keys. We have E flat, F, and G, which is the first 3 notes of the E flat major scale, and then we have first 3 notes of the B flat major scale. So together, this is really beautiful sound. And really, we're almost playing the entire E flat major scale. The only note we're missing is that 4th degree. So you can also think about it like that as well. Our next progression is C to D7, sharp 9 to E minor. So the first thing to note is we have this really, really strong bass pattern. Just rising by whole steps, C to D to E. I had to include at least one progression which has it because it just makes so much sense. But really this chord structure is very simple because we have our D7 chord, voiced in thirds, and then we just add the sharp 9 on top of that. Now the sharp 9 is also the flat third. So instead of having these notes like this, dissonance spread over octaves is more palatable. We move the F up an octave. Interestingly enough, this D7 sharp 9 chord has a lot of tones in common with the first chord, which was, right? Because we have the F sharp, we have the A, we have the C, we have the D. So a lot of the same things, but just with a slightly different voicing, and the F here, which is not in the previous chord, has a completely different sound, right? Versus so a completely different sound just by moving things around, and the difference of just 1 note or 2 notes really. So our last progression is C to D flat major 9, flat 9, to E flat major 13, to E sus 2 4, to E major. A mouthful. Sounds like this. So the first thing to note is that the bass has this really interesting rising motion. We got half step, whole step, half step. It's actually the first couple notes of the diminished half whole scale, which alternates between half steps and whole steps. Sounds like this. But as we follow that diminished scale, we're hitting the D flat and the E flat, which is very important because it gives this chord progression, like the E flat chord from before, a really flat sensibility. Talking about the chord structure, the first thing to note is we have this descending melodic line versus this rising line in the bass. Now this is a huge interval in the bass. It's a 9th interval. And I think that this really gives the chord a really nice openness to it. But yeah, that contrary motion between the melodic part and the lower notes, I think is really cool. And it's one of the reasons why the progression works so well. Another thing to note about that first chord especially, this is a highly unusual major chord, right? Because we have, without that D, it's just a beautiful open D flat major 9 chord type thing. But I include this D in here, it obscures the sound of it, a little bit of additional tension. And why did I include that? I just thought it sounded good to my ears. So from an intuitive perspective, I thought it was interesting. And then the last thing I do I end it like that, and that basically is just this type of chord structure here. The easiest way to understand this is just as a polychord. E in the bass, C on top of that. So if you want to analyze this chord from an E perspective rather than a polychord perspective, you could say that it's E sharp 5, sharp 9, add 5. Now, the reason why you need an add 5 at the end of all of that is because any sharp 5 chord does not naturally include the 5th in it. So without that, it would look like this, right? This is E sharp 5, sharp 9, but since we have the B in the lower register, we need to say add 5 back there. And then of course we have these two dissonances, but separated over octaves. It sounds like that. This all being said, I think it's way easier to just say C over E, the polychord way. So thanks for watching. If you learned something, please feel free to subscribe or give me a thumbs up. You could also type in the comments below about which of the progressions you thought was the nicest. Additionally, you could find other resources on my channel, other types of jazz harmony analysis, ways to move around C with passing chords. If you have a particular progression or chord that you would like me to cover, please let me know below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.